Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for coming out today. Robert, can you hear me with the mic? Is that close enough? Okay. I'm Fiona Lyons. I work at Kralo State Historic Site, and we are going to chat about one of my favorite characters of the 17th century New Netherland colony, Adriaen van der Donck. This is part of a larger series that Bethlehem Public Library is doing for the American 250th, so I don't know what the next one is, but definitely keep your eye out for it. I do like to share a little bit of a disclaimer before this talk, because there's so much involved in the topic of Adriaen van der Donck that unless you are all willing to sit here for about 6 hours, I would not be able to fit in. So a lot of things, it's going to feel rushed, like we're going through this timeline of his biography, and there are so much good things, great things, bad things, and atrocious things that I have to gloss over. So what I hope you get out of this is, instead of a fully detailed description of this minor period in North American history, hopefully it piques some interest, and there's an aspect or multiple aspects of this talk that you want to look into further, which I am more than willing to chat with you about. But we'll get started, and it all is going to start in Breda. And I think this went to sleep. Okay. Technical difficulties. There we go. And we are going to start before Adriaen van der Donck was even born. This is one of my favorite anecdotes from this period of Dutch history in the 16th century. We're all familiar with the Trojan horse. The Dutch had their own version of the Trojan horse in the 16th century, and it was in the city of Breda. This is a fortified city. It's currently located in the southern border of the Netherlands, right above Belgium. At this time, it is often torn between Spanish rule and Dutch rule. It is a city that is tug of war. So at this period of time, Breda is under Spanish rule. In the hopes of getting it back under Dutch rule, the Prince of Orange approaches a peat boat operator who hopefully can smuggle approximately 70 soldiers into the fortified city without the Spanish knowing. This peat boat operator is open to the possibility, so they successfully smuggle all of these Dutch military soldiers past the walls. They take the Spanish by complete surprise, and Breda is now under Dutch rule again. The peat boat operator, his name was Adriaen van Bergen, and he later becomes the grandfather of Adriaen van der Donck. The Prince of Orange was so grateful for this smuggling operation that he gifted property to Adriaen van Bergen, and so now you have the Van Bergens marrying into the Van der Donks, and these are both families of higher social standing. They're property owners. They both have a coat of arms, which is a good kind of sign of high social status. So Adriaen van der Donck is going to be born into this life of privilege. He's born somewhere between 1618 and 1620. We aren't 100% sure what year and when. And growing up, he's born at a time of peace. There's a 12 years truce between the Spanish and the Dutch. And so for the first about 7 years of his life, it's peaceful Dutch rule. Protestants and Catholics can both live together in Breda under Dutch rule. And there's no violent conflicts until the truce ends. And now the Spanish have surrounded Breda once more, and they are blocking food and water and medicine from getting in. Over the next year, about a third of the population of Breda dies from starvation or disease, leaving Breda with no choice but to surrender. Now that it's under Spanish rule again, Protestants are not allowed to practice their religion. So the majority of Protestant families, despite social status, end up moving north, including Van der Donck, his parents, his siblings, and the majority of his family. During this time, this is when Van der Donck's education is starting. He goes to a Latin school, which is meant to prepare students for university or higher education. The Dutch at this time, they have a very high literacy rate compared to any other European country. Latin school would include curriculums like Greek, Hebrew, Latin, religion, mathematics, logic, as well as planetary sciences. When he was about 20, two things happen at the same time. Number one, Breda is under Dutch rule again. So a great many of his neighbors who would have gone north with him are returning. A large amount of his family returns to Breda, but he does not. Instead, at the age of approximately 20, he goes on to the city of Leiden, specifically to attend Leiden University, one of the older universities in the country. And at this period, 1638 into the 1640s, the University of Leiden offers 4 areas of study. You can go for law, philosophy, medicine, or, I'm blanking on the 4th, theology. He enters to be a law student. And you'd expect a 17th century university lifestyle to differ greatly from our university expectations today, but they're pretty similar. Students are going to live either on-campus housing or maybe private housing off campus. A lot of professors provide housing as well. There's a lot of opportunity for socializing. One of the big perks of going to the University of Leiden is you are exempt from a tax on beer. A great many people enroll there just to have this exemption. It's lucrative for the students, not so much for beer tax. The university is also home to a fencing school, and this fencing school is going to provide instruction not only in fencing, but also riding and shooting. There's a garden that was originally started to grow medicinal herbs, but as it grew into a larger entity, other exotic plants were grown there as well. Greenhouses were constructed for these plants with little stoves in them, and personal attendants would man the stoves all day to keep the fire going so that the plants would remain warm and survive. There was also a library at Leiden. This is one of the first libraries in the Netherlands. And then additionally, a unique part of this university was its anatomy theater. In the wintertime, public dissections were done. The 300 plus capacity would be sold out. It was so popular that classes, the day of these dissections, would be canceled because everyone's going to the dissections. In the summer months, it's probably unpleasant to have dissections in the setting and environment, so instead it would be turned almost into a museum or gallery of sorts. Curiosities were put on display: skeletons, plants, seeds, prints, other exotic items that people would come not just from within the university, but outside as well to see. This college also has classes 5 days a week. However, the days that you don't have classes are Wednesdays and Saturdays. You still have class on Sundays, but there's time left out for church. Now there's a shift. It is very unusual for people at this time to complete their degrees. In the mid-17th century, only about 8% of students actually complete their degree. It's more the experience. You might not be entering college with the idea of a specific job that you're planning on going into. So people still accept that you went there. You aren't required to have a degree from there. It's a very, very small percentage. So he ends up leaving before getting his law degree, and he goes to Amsterdam, and he approaches an individual, Kilian van Rensselaer. He is a diamond and pearl merchant, a former director of the Dutch West India Company, and a very recent landowner of hundreds of thousands of acres in the New World. This plot of land is what's known as a patroonship. Patroonships are huge land grants that kind of function as a sub-colony. He's the patroon or leader of this land grant, and he is in charge of populating this land, supplying this land, and governing this land. And what the typical guidelines are for patroonships is within 4 years of being granted your land grant, you should have 50 settlers in your property. It took Killian 8. It was very difficult at this time to get Dutch colonists over to the New World. This is the Dutch Golden Age. There is a huge rise in the middle class. Not everyone's lining up to go across the ocean and start from scratch. Often Killian approaches orphanages, and any men, particularly boys really, that are aging out, 16 years old and onward. He'd say, well, you don't really have much keeping you here. You might as well try it out in the New World. Often other European refugees who first came to the Netherlands, they're now going to take that extra step and travel to the New World, to the Dutch colony, despite not being Dutch. So it's difficult for him to find people to move to his colony. Adriaen van der Donck approaches Killian with a suggestion that he could work for him, and he's also working on behalf of other families from Breda who have demonstrated interest in moving to the colony. So Killian really can't say no to that. Adriaen van der Donck has the added sneakiness that he tells Killian, you know, this other patroon down the street, he's interested in hiring me too. So, like, I need a decision from you fast. He's being clever. Finally, Killian van Rensselaer not only is interested in taking the families who's working on behalf of him, but he has a very privileged, educated man of social standing in front of him. There aren't many of those in the colony at the moment to work on Killian's behalf. So rather than just have Adriaen van der Donck go to this New World and run a farm, help bring other families over and get them settled, he hires him in an official capacity to act as a scout. And this is going to start in 1645. This role is the equivalent of a sheriff or a prosecutor. He's being sent to protect Killian's business interests, protect his profits, and enforce any laws and directions that have been given to Killian. Killian never comes to North America. The best way that I describe his management style is absent micromanager, and that is going to cause some issues very quickly. As soon as Adriaen van der Donck approaches Rensselaerswyck, the name of Killian's patroonship, and this plot would have taken areas of Rensselaer County, Albany County, parts of Columbia County. It's spread over both sides of the Hudson River. It is a huge amount of land. It is about 750,000 acres. Adriaen van der Donck immediately has issues. He has to choose between developing community partnerships and enforcing the law of his employer. He tends to lean on the side of the colonists who are already there. There's already very healthy black market of tradings, particularly beaver furs and other items, and Killian, that risks his profit. Any outside services from other patroonships are also going to negatively impact his profits. He wants everything to be done within Rensselaerswyck. If you need a bricklayer, that bricklayer had better come from Rensselaerswyck. Better not go to Manhattan or anywhere outside. For the most part, colonists and farmers are upset about this. It's going to eat into any of their yields. Any of their trade items might be more expensive or more dear to get to. So pretty immediately, there are complaints to Adriaen van der Donck and about Adriaen van der Donck. And so he tends to lean in the side of the farmers and colonists, and he doesn't enforce this law. On the slides behind me, I have a number of quotes from Killian to Adriaen van der Donck. We have those letters from Killian. The letters that Adriaen van der Donck sent to him are lost to time or maybe undiscovered, but we know that Killian starts having a lot of displeasure. Like almost every other official that he sends on his behalf, he finds fault. It's difficult to manage remotely when you are an ocean away and just one letter might take 3 months to get from one continent to the next. Never mind the response, which could take another 6 months. It becomes very tricky. Killian believes that Adriaen van der Donck is acting above his station. At one point, he accuses him not as acting as an officer, but as acting as a director. And this really comes to a head when eventually Killian hears tell that Adriaen van der Donck is touring the Catskills, perhaps looking for property to purchase himself. This means that he's looking to become a landowner, which Killian takes great offense to. So Killian sends orders to North America to hold Adriaen van der Donck essentially captive, make him swear an oath that he will never purchase this land, and to do whatever you possibly can, take his goods, take his money, anything you can do to prevent this from happening. It's just another insult. At the same time, Killian is in very poor health. We do not know the exact reason why he died, but he died before those notes and rules made it to North America. It does seem that posthumously they were seen through. Adriaen van der Donck did not purchase this land in the Catskills. He also, at some point shortly after Killian's death, stopped being an official on Killian's behalf. He remained at his farm in Rensselaerswyck, but he also continued traveling between Albany, essentially Fort Orange, and Manhattan. In Manhattan, he becomes known to the director at the time, Willem Kieft. Willem Kieft is a difficult topic to talk about, and it could be in its own hour-long lecture, his leadership of New Netherland. Ultimately, under his leadership, there are a number of violent conflicts between the colonists and the native groups surrounding Manhattan. There's a particular raid on a Lenape tribe that results in hundreds of deaths, a lot of violence, and the Dutch West India Company and the States General, the governing body of the Netherlands, require Kieft to enter into peace negotiations. Part of the peace negotiations brought Kieft up to Fort Orange to speak with the Mohawk. Throughout Adriaen van der Donck's travels, he learned a lot about Mohawk in particular, but other native customs, languages, and expectations, including the custom that you approach negotiations with a gift. It adds integrity to the negotiations. It makes it seem like you're taking it seriously. Kieft was not aware of this and was unprepared and did not have items to gift the Mohawk. Adriaen van der Donck was able to A, make him aware of this custom, and B, provide him with a quantity of wampum beads that could be gifted to the indigenous groups. And wampum, if you are unfamiliar, is a form of currency that the indigenous use at this time. They're made from quahog shells, and they're going to be used as small currency. So white beads are more common, and that could purchase smaller items, and purple, or referred to then as black beads, are going to be a slightly higher value. So think dimes to quarters, and you can use this as currency. Typically, before Europeans came to North America, it was a ceremonial item. It would be gifted in times of peace treaties, maybe between tribes. But when you think about how environment informs interpretation, when Europeans come to North America and they see this gift or transaction of beads between one tribe to another, they think it's currency. So it very quickly becomes currency. Kieft is extremely grateful for this help. The peace negotiations went very well, and to recognize van der Donck's role in this peace negotiation, he gifts van der Donck with his own land grant. So now he finally has that land that he seems to have wanted since he started this venture. And he becomes his own patroon of Donck. Donck has two potential meanings. Number one, it could mean colony of Donck, quite literally. Additionally, it could come from the Dutch word kal, meaning mountain pass, and Donck, meaning, or really duck, meaning marsh. Could be one or the other. It's right outside of Manhattan, north of Manhattan, so it keeps him very close to the center of New Netherland. So at the same time, he finally gets his land. He's working with the director on peace negotiations, and he gets married to an English woman who lives in Manhattan at the time. They initially move up to Rensselaerswyck to live there for a little while, get his farm settled in order, but then they permanently move to Donck. more changes are afoot. If you look into the leadership of Willem Kieft, you'll know why he was pushed out eventually. After the quite tyrannical rule of Kieft, the Dutch West India Company and the States General finally recalled him back to the Netherlands. He never actually made it there to defend his actions. There was a shipwreck, and he died. So he and all of his records were gone, and all we have left is the records of everyone surrounding him, which were not positive recordings. So now there needs to be a new director, and that director is Peter Stuyvesant. Everyone is looking forward to Stuyvesant arriving in New Netherland. Everyone's very optimistic about it because they're so over the previous director, and it's very quickly fizzles out. He arrives apparently with great fanfare. Adriaen van der Donck described it as like a peacock, fancy and full of pomposity. And then Peter Stuyvesant disappoints most of the colonists at large pretty immediately by adding a wine tax on top of an already unpopular beer tax that was instituted by Kieft. So it pretty quickly looks like bad news. For the most part, initially, it seems like van der Donck and Stuyvesant weren't friends, weren't enemies. They coexisted, but that ends very quickly too. There is a representative body in the Netherlands, in New Netherland, and it's referred to as the Nine Men. And they are essentially elected by the colonists. Usually there's a larger amount elected by the colonists, and then the director picks a smaller amount of representatives. Adriaen van der Donck was the secretary of the Nine Men, and Stuyvesant did not want this representative body to work independently from his rule. He wanted everything that they would have sent to the Netherlands to go through him first. This was met with contention, and ultimately van der Donck is keeping a journal of their meetings that are now forbidden by Stuyvesant. They're not supposed to gather anymore. Any complaints about Stuyvesant, and when Stuyvesant takes this journal, he ends up putting Adriaen van der Donck under house arrest, and he escalates it up to the States General and the Dutch West India Company. Now, if you can imagine going to court for any reason, it's usually within the same town or city, or you aren't traveling months to get there. What this results in is basically everyone but Stuyvesant, he sends a representative on his behalf, having to return to the Netherlands and defend their actions and complaints. So this is the first time in about 8 years that Adriaen van der Donck is returning to Europe. When they approach the States General, it starts a very, very lengthy process. They cannot imagine how long they're actually going to be spending in Amsterdam and The Hague defending their actions. Everything also has to be reported back to New Netherland, and you have to wait for these responses. So months and months later, they are still there trying to get the attention of the States General or trying to get a decision made by the States General. Adriaen van der Donck uses this time not only to share his positive observations with the States General, but also with the public at large. He publishes a pamphlet praising New Netherland. It becomes very popular, and it helps to spur more interest in New Netherland. All Adriaen van der Donck wants is to get more colonists over the ocean to populate this land. Finally, the States General does make a decision, and they side with the colonists and van der Donck, and they send notice to New Netherland and Stuyvesant that he has to now come to the Netherlands and defend his actions as well. They are 3 days away from finally getting on a ship to go back to New Netherland. Adriaen van der Donck has also packed up the majority of his family that were still in Europe, his parents, his siblings, servants, other families that are interested in going, when the States General completely changed their mind. And they are now siding with the Dutch West India Company and Stuyvesant because there is increased tension between the Dutch and the English, and the States General is very dependent on the Dutch West India Company for naval defenses for their colonies. And now Adriaen van der Donck specifically is not allowed to leave because he is considered an annoyance, and he will cause problems if he goes back to New Netherland. Everyone else, his wife, his family, they all travel. and he is stranded in the Netherlands once again with a lot of time on his hands. So he does two things. He expands on his pamphlet and he writes a description of New Netherland. At the same time, he re-enrolls in Leiden University, takes exams for his law degree, and is given his law degree. And about 5 days after that, after agreeing to the States General's terms that he will drop all matters that are annoying to him, should he be allowed to return to New Netherland. He does ask for one condition to apply, that he is still able to practice law. And the agreement was, you can give people advice, but you can't actually appear in court. Probably for a couple of reasons. Number one, it takes a little bit of power away from him. Number two, they quoted the reason as there's no one qualified enough to oppose you, so it just wouldn't be fair to have one practicing formally trained lawyer in the Netherlands, because no one could possibly go up against you. They ultimately left it up to Stuyvesant's decision. Stuyvesant absolutely refuses, and Adriaen van der Donck is never seen in the court records again as practicing law. He's there as being an involved party, but he's never actually appearing in court. Now, a description of New Netherland. He finishes it in 1653. This is the same year he's finally able to go back to the Netherlands, and he submits it for copyright. It takes another 2 years to be published. And it's once he's back in the Netherlands that it's published. And this book, once it's ultimately published, it's going to be about 100 pages long. It involves a map insert, and it's written in 4 parts. And those parts are, number one, a physical description of New Netherland. Number two, of the manners and extraordinary qualities of the original natives of New Netherland. Third section, of the nature, amazing ways, and properties of the beavers. And the fourth section isn't a written paragraph book form. Instead, he writes a dialogue between a Dutch citizen and a New Netherlander, a colonist, a Dutch colonist, on the state of New Netherland. Not only does this kind of become a 17th century North American travel guide, it's also a form of propaganda to get individuals over. But what's interesting about reading this today, because we use it as a primary source document of the 17th century time, is it's riddled with mistakes and inaccuracies. So much so that if you read this translation, I highly recommend any other book, you kind of go back to the very far back of the book for the notes. If something really, it's like, oh, I don't know what that is, or where's that word from, or I wonder where they found this. Read every single note along with this translation. And you will learn a lot of things that Adriaen van der Donck was quite mistaken about. And they could be little things or big things. But we're going to see some of those. So the next few slides I have, we are going to look at statements that Adriaen van der Donck made, but they're in the form of a multiple choice question. So the correct answer to these questions are not necessarily the correct answer. It is just what he described or said in his book. So we're going to take everything with a grain of salt, but hopefully you will enjoy. In his physical description of New Netherlands, he is listing sometimes in multi-paragraph form, just list after list of plants that are growing here, or descriptions of items. So what did Adriaen van der Donck not claim could be found in New Netherland? Who thinks gold? Anyone for giant lobsters? Unicorns. Okay, and rubies. Okay. It is in fact rubies. We know unicorns aren't found in North America, but Adriaen van der Donck was sure they were. He never saw them. He saw the hides though, and never the horns. But local indigenous groups said that they were here. There's more than one occasion in record of 17th century colonists being told of the presence of unicorns. It seems like a large prank that all indigenous groups said, we're going to trick Europeans that there were unicorns here. They're really into unicorns. We're going to convince them that they were here. We will show them a deer hide. The horns, they just don't exist right now. But rubies, he did not say that there were rubies. He also alleged that there were lobsters of about 5 or 6 feet long. Unlikely. Perhaps a sturgeon brushed up against his leg and it was a mistake. There was also believed that gold was found in New Netherland. For the most part, it was fool's gold. Very often they were sending metals back to the Netherlands for it to be disproven, but you do read in not only his records, but other letters, gold has been found. Here's our quote about unicorns. All right, next question. Now we get into some of the animal descriptions, which personally are my favorite. What did Adriaen Donck write about native bears in New Netherland? A, to get away from a bear, you must climb up a tree with a lot of branches in order to baffle the bear. B, bears somersault out of trees. C, bears are able to plug their own wounds with leaves or anything at hand. Or D, all of the above. Any guesses for A? B, C, D. Okay. All of the above. How do beavers allegedly move wood to build their dams, according to Adriaen Donck? A, female beavers drag logs on their back. B, several beavers line up against the logs and they roll it together. C, logs only come from trees near the water. Or D, male beavers drag logs to impress female beavers. Anyone for A? B? C? D? Okay. In fact, he describes female beavers dragging logs on their backs. Highly unlikely. Adriaen Donck reported that whales were witnessed as far north as A, Troy, B, Yonkers, C, Poughkeepsie, D, Newburgh. A, B, C, D. Troy. This is in fact true. We have had whale sightings as far up as there in the 17th century, and you can see multiple accounts of it in 17th century court records. One did get away, but one was beached, which apparently, according to the records, caused quite the smell. All right. According to Adriaen Donck, where were lizards potentially crawling into? Ears, B, barns, C, butts, D, ships. Anyone for A? B, C, D? Okay, we have definitely had some people who have read A Description of New Netherland before. Yes, in fact, it is butts. Unlikely, but a great conversation starter when talking about 17th century history. And if you need to get some kids interested, butt lizards, it's the way to go. Alrighty, next part. We are going to have some guesses. So this is a description that he wrote in A Description of New Netherland. And after reading it, I would like to know if you have any guesses as to what animal he is describing. It is slightly more than the length of a finger, not counting the beak. The tail is that's supposed to say thumbs, apologies, breadth at its widest, and many of its feathers have a beautiful glint to them. The little beak and the two tiny legs are like other birds. As far as As can be observed, its beak is not used for pecking or eating. It sucks from flowers everywhere in the manner of bees, and its beak is shaped for that purpose. That is all it lives on, and it makes a buzzing sound like a bee. Apologies for the typos in that excerpt. Any guesses as to the animal? Hummingbird. There was great debate whether a hummingbird was a bee or a bird at this time because of its frantic movement. And you see this in other, even later records, like in the 18th century. Our next one, about as big and stout as horses, with a neck like a camel's, with long hair like a horse's mane on top, a short tail and cloven hooves. They are not wild or predatory, and they resemble elks in character. I think I heard it. Moose. And I believe this is our last one. About as broad as it is long, very short, so to speak, no legs or shanks. When they walk, one can hardly see any semblance or shape of legs on them. The claws or paws are hairless, resembling swan's feet, though not as broad. The animal has a very short, practically no neck. Tails are flattish and hairless and have the appearance of being set with fish scales. Any guesses? Beaver. His unique descriptions do result in some images such as this, and one of my personal favorites, a beaver similar to a very muscular chipmunk. If you have not read A Description of New Netherland yet, I highly recommend it. It's a very, I think, accessible read for a 17th century document. It's translated in English, and that does help. But it's not only informative, but it's also quite humorous. It's one of the first books that we give anyone who works at Crello to read. Upon his return to the Netherlands in 1655, it's finally published. It sells out in its first year and really helps drive the number of colonists who are coming to the Netherlands, because there are far more copies selling in Amsterdam compared to New Netherland. The entire point was for people in Amsterdam and the Netherlands at large to read it and be so in love with his description and observations that they move here as well. However, 1655 turns into a very eventful year for van der Donck. In September of 1655, while Stuyvesant is away with a military to try to prevent land in Delaware being taken by the Swedes and becoming parts of short-lived New Sweden, there was a multi-tribal native raid on Manhattan. They worked their way through Manhattan and up further north, including Adriaen van der Donck's property in current-day Yonkers. Over the next few days, several lives and hostages were taken, and Adriaen van der Donck's property was no exception. His house was looted, hostages were removed. For the most part, hostages were women and children. Several men died. And so it's assumed that this is when Adriaen van der Donck met his end. We do not have proof or record of that. By January of that year, his wife is referred to as a widow. So it's assumed it's at this period he, perhaps his brother, maybe his father, also were struck down. The official record of this raid, the statistics, over 3 days, at least 50 colonists were killed. Over 100 hostages were taken, and those hostage negotiations lasted months. 500, 600 plus cattle were either taken or destroyed. Huge amounts of grain and other resources were destroyed as well. Houses were burned down and looted. It was a significant moment in New Netherland history. Adriaen van der Donck's wife eventually moved to Virginia, and she became a medical practitioner. She was a midwife. She also provided other medical aid. There's records of her being either rewarded for saving people's lives or sued by patients. Then she moved to Maryland. She remarried in 1661, and then in 1666, the New Netherland is finally under English rule forever until the American Revolution. So she returns as an Englishwoman and tries to lay claim back to Donck. She and her husband are successful. She gets Donck back and immediately sells it to her brother, and she goes back to Maryland. As for later editions of A Description of New Netherland, it's published for the second time in 1656, after Adriaen van der Donck's death. It is also extremely successful. And then as you go through time, it loses popularity. And until it's translated in English for the first time in the mid-1800s, there isn't much being known about it. But that mid-19th century has an increase. It becomes of interest again. There's a lot of other Dutch history being researched. However, that translation is not regarded as fully accurate. A lot of Dutch grammar was mistranslated and changed the meanings, so it's considered unreliable. It isn't until later translations in the 2000s that we have more accurate translations that we can learn from. I do recommend this edition particularly, and their notes are very helpful. As for the rest of van der Donck's legacy, you can kind of see it pop up everywhere. We have a huge Dutch legacy, especially in this area. I recall when I first started working at Crelo, and I was describing Dutch influence in New York, and a family member had asked me, really, Dutch influence in New York? And I started listing off all the names that we have in streets, and Schuyler, and I went, luckily I was home, but I was asked, okay, I get it, you can stop. Went home, immediately texted her again to be like, wait, Wall Street in Manhattan. Okay, I've got it. There is influence in New York, I believe you now. In the property that was Donck, it's now known as Yonkers. Yonkers comes from a nickname, essentially, that was given to Adriaen van der Donck. It comes from a Dutch term, essentially meaning young gentleman. It's an honorific that was given to him. There are several references in court records referring to him as Jonker, and slowly that name stuck. His farm or property would be like, that's Yonkers land. So now that area, still called Yonkers today. There's Van der Donck Park that was named in 2012 near the area where his sawmill would have been constructed. You also see Adriaen van der Donck in some pop culture. This screen grab in the middle here, which looks a little scary, is from a video game where Adriaen van der Donck is a character that you happen to come across. I've never played it. If you Google him, it pops up, and I know a couple colleagues who have come across him in this game. They happen to recognize the name. In the Netherlands, going back to his family history, there remains a statue and a replica peat boat in recognition of Adriaen van Bergen's role in bringing Breda back to Dutch rule. And then, like I said, in the 19th century, there's a bit of a resurgence in interest for Description of New Netherland. This is a piece from Albany Institute of History and Art, and it caught my eye because there's a unicorn right in the middle. And if you look on the bottom, it's described as wild animals of New Netherland. So I don't know for sure, but I am pretty confident that the artist, or someone who maybe commissioned the art or was involved in the art, knew of A Description of New Netherland, perhaps read it, and so unicorns are included. We also have yet another scary looking beaver. All right. Any questions? That's all my information, right? I have a lot more information, but we'd be here for ages. Yes?
Where is, did you say Crelo?
Yes.
Where is that?
Crelo is in Rensselaer. Yep, so we're right on the edge. If you go a number of blocks south from the train station, Amtrak, we're located there. We're in a little residential area. We're hidden away. Hardly anyone knows that we're there. We are open for tours at the moment, but due to construction, we've had to scale back our tour schedule. When we're done, I have some information on Crelo up here, and you're more than welcome to take a rack card, and hopefully you can come and see us. Right now, our tours are only Saturday and Sunday. Hopefully, sometime in the summer, we can open up to a 5-day 5-day tour schedule. I also have our event calendar as well if you'd like to come to any of our special events. So please come and take some information if you have been to Cralo and if you have never been to Cralo. We love to have new visitors in addition to returning ones. Any other questions? Yes?
What's the name of the video game?
I wrote it down. It's because I looked it up this morning in case someone asked. Civilizations 4, subtitle colonization, maybe? A version of colonize, something like that. I don't know the details. If you look it up, it'll come up. And if you look up Adriaen Donck, just put his name into Google, that image will come up, and that should get you there. Yeah, yeah.
And one other question, what kind of boats? I couldn't understand what you were saying, peat boats or
Peat, yes, like the type of fuel that you might use, yeah. Yep, no problem. Any other questions? Yes,
Not a question, but regarding the unicorn.
yes.
I did read the book just in this past week, and I believe it said that he got that information from some of the Native Americans.
Yes.
They said they were much farther west and in the mountainous areas. And as far as a unicorn, I was thinking, would we ever have believed of a rhinoceros?
Probably not. I also put giraffes in that category. If you had never seen a giraffe before, didn't know they existed, and someone's like, it's kind of a horse but has a really, really long neck.
And all of
Yeah.
the Tyrannosaurus and all these other things that they've been digging up huge skeletons of, would we have believed in those when I was a kid? I don't think.
Well, you have that instance with, like when mastodons are being dug up and mammoths, it was believed that they were biblical one-eyed giants at the time. And then, you know, we can laugh about it now in our contemporary understanding of any of these things. It's like, oh, they believed it in unicorns. They thought that mastodons were, you know, one-eyed giants. But thinking back to that, especially where religion plays such a huge role, you're going to believe, okay, this is a biblical giant that has been buried and we found it. Yeah. So it's believable at the time, but we can find humor in it today. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much. Please come up. I also have a beaver pelt if you want to see what that feels like, and a couple other resources if you're interested you can take note of, and our email list if you'd like to get onto Cralo's email list. Thank you so much.